name is Elaine Gallagher-Adams. I am a bioclimatic architect. I actually started off in historic preservation, but a lot of us in historic preservation get conservation head. We learn how to make buildings more efficient, and then pretty soon we're sucked into the vortex of sustainable living. And I've been doing this for 40 years, a long time. I stopped putting on my resume how many years I've been doing this, really. But I used to work for an organization called Rocky Mountain Institute out of Boulder, Colorado, and just outside of Aspen. We are really an energy think and do tank, really, and focused on renewable energy and efficiency, getting people off of fossil fuels globally. So it was a huge undertaking, right? If I wanted to do a project, I had to draw a straight line between my project and reducing global emissions, carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. And if it didn't have an impact, we would pass. So it was really an interesting place to be where I felt really impactful, right? And it's a strange place to be in a mid-career because anything after that feels a lot less impactful. But I tried because when I left there, I started teaching college. Fantastic. I love working with young people. And there are a whole bunch of young architects out there who get it now. After teaching for 7 years, I love hearing from my now architect students, and they're doing amazing work. We all have lots of reason to be very optimistic about the future. But while I was with Rocky Mountain Institute, a friend told me, you have to read this new book that came out, and this was like 12 years ago. And he says, it's called The World Without Us. He says, it's as if everybody just evaporated on the planet, and it's about the story of the Earth after that. I'm like, oh, okay, that's weird. But I started reading it, and I got sucked in. I mean, it was so easy to read that I had to go buy another copy because I give it away so often. And it's just really interesting. And here I was in a place in my career where I was focused on how buildings perform. So I'm a real building science nerd. At the same time, I love beautiful buildings. So one of the aspects of sustainable design is that it be beautiful, because we don't take care of things that aren't beautiful. That's just a fact. So a green building should be really beautiful. And these days they really are. But here I started thinking about what our long-term impact is on the planet. And this book kind of shook me to my core. So I want to take you on a little bit of the mind journey that it took me on, and maybe we can get an interesting conversation going after this. So what does the world without us look like? This? That's Mesa Verde. Who here knows how old when Mesa Verde was last occupied? Does anybody know? How many 100 years ago? Thousands? Very close, 700. Not really that long ago, when you think about it, right? It's, what is that, 1300s? This was an entire civilization. And we don't even know really why they left. We have theories, there's lots of theories, right? But is this what the world without us looks like? It's the world without them. And what's left here? There's some really interesting ceramics. There's a lot of adobe. Adobe's a great material. Not much else. It's interesting when you think about material science. What's left after the civilization? You know, there's some grain bins. They found evidence of grain being stored. That's about it. That's a pretty low impact. It's a pretty phenomenal site if you get a chance to go out there. It just kind of blows your mind, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful hike to get in. And it's extraordinary. You learn about how these people lived, and then they evaporate. And what's left? Well, in The World Without Us, the author, Alan Weisman, talks about how long it takes our stuff to go away, right? Do you think about decomposition? Every time I think about decomposition, I think of Monty Python, the decomposing composers. Sorry, I planted that song in a lot of y'all's head just now. But decomposition is super important. And you think about all the creatures on the planet that contribute to decomposition and how important they are. Otherwise, everything that ever lived would still be here. Yuck, right? So decomposition is super important. And what role that plays in the stuff we buy, in the decisions we make, and kind of everything, right? So this is a timeline that somebody put together based on this book, and it's not very clear. I'm sorry, it was clear on my computer. But in essence, within the first day, I can't even read that right now, within about 24 hours, the air starts to clear a little bit. So humans are gone, the cars are just stopped, everything's stopped. There are some systems that are still running, building systems probably still running. There's probably some energy systems still running. But the cars are not going anywhere. So just losing emissions from cars, the air starts to clear. When did we see this just recently? Pandemic, yeah. A month into the pandemic, Los Angeles had blue skies, and people were like, wow, the sky is blue here. I think they thought it was actually always cloudy. That's not clouds. You know, when you see the sunbeams coming in through the clouds and you see this magical, godlike thing reaching down to the earth, the reason you're seeing the sunbeams is all the solids in the air. Sometimes it's atmospheric pollution, often, right? When you go to the theater, and this one's actually pretty good air quality. You can always tell the air quality in a theater. I'm going to ruin it for all of you. When you can see, when the lights come on and you can see those dramatic beams of light, just put your face mask on right there. That we just emit a lot of stuff. We emit a lot of carbon into the air, a lot of dust. There's a lot of stuff that we put into the air. And within 24, 36 hours, it's gone. The skies are clear. That's amazing to me, right? You go on a bit longer, a few days later, there's no electricity. So the emissions that are coming from electric plants go away. And maybe some of the tree species come back, right? Not so fast. A few hundred years, maybe the tree species come back. We've lost a lot of trees, tree species and animal species in the Appalachian Range because of all the coal-fired power plants over the years. But it's really, did we just take on some lights here? Yeah. Can somebody turn off the extra lights? There we go, thank you. I look better in low light anyway. So, things like paper goes away. My daughter did a science fair project years ago. One of the few times in her life she actually planned ahead more than 16 hours. But we knew that the science fair was coming in the spring, and back in the fall I said, let's do an experiment. That was big when paper versus plastic was really big. I said, let's bury 3 plastic grocery bags and 3 paper grocery bags in the backyard at different levels and mark them and leave them alone. Just let them be. And then we'll dig them up in the spring and you're going to do your whole project on that. She's like, cool, I don't have to do anything but dig holes. That's easy. She won first place. Because when she went to dig up the paper bags, they were gone. And the plastic bags, we rinsed them off and they looked like the day she buried them, of course. Plastic bags floating in the waterways around here break my heart. Oops, sorry, sound guy. It breaks my heart to see the plastic bags. So recently, County of Beaufort County passed a single-use plastic ban. Their stores aren't allowed to use single-use plastic. What was the response to that? Did anybody notice? Heavier plastic. So it's not single-use. That was their comment. When I called them on it, well, it's not single-use. I said, no, but now it's going to sit in the marsh for 300 years instead of 200 years. I just hate that, right? For a while there, we had some momentum getting rid of straws in those stupid little plastic drink stirrers. I'd like to make the little plastic flossers illegal. I was hiking the Appalachian Trail. About every mile and a half, there's stupid plastic flosser on the trail up in the middle of nowhere. I mean, this is just stuff that we know what we're doing when we buy it. Then around here, especially, a lot of styrofoam. When I moved to this I lived in Denver for 20 years, grew up in Chattanooga, so I am kind of coming home, living here. So much styrofoam. I've gotten to where I just carry my own empty glass to put stuff in. But styrofoam has a half-life of 1 million years, in theory. How long does it take you to drink your glass of Coke? Is it worth it? 1 million years? That's crazy, right? Why do we let this happen? Why are we allowing those clamshells for leftovers that you're probably going to forget on the table? You know, styrofoam just makes me nuts. There's use for styrofoam or for foam products. I put foam in my house as insulation, really good solid foam, but I used a soy-based foam. It's a little better. But I want my house to last 100 years. So I can justify that. It's not me drinking a drink for 10 minutes. It's a big difference in my head anyway. I'm still looking for better insulation that's more biodegradable. But for now, the performance of my house was really important to me. So these materials start to really matter, right? In a building, in my life, what are my clothes made out of? What's polyester? It's plastic. Where do microplastics come from? Polyester. A lot of microplastics that are going down the drain in the laundry are coming from fleece, polyester clothes, all kinds of stuff like that. Microplastics come from all kinds of things. Then we have PFAS, forever chemicals, which is huge. I spend my summers in Maine, and half of Maine is covered with PFAS because somebody thought it was a great idea to sell farmers sewage from New York City as fertilizer. What are we using as fertilizer? And it's like sewage. You've got prescription medication, you've got hormones, you've got plastics. It's like crazy. Who thought that was a good idea? They also have it out west in the plains. It was used largely on grain, not necessarily for human food. And you're kind of going, oh, thank God, right? But it's still really prevalent, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with it. They're now trying to find microorganisms that eat PFAS and microplastics. Thank you, nature, right? Nature-based solutions are going to fix what we did. And I think about that a lot. How do we fix what we've done, right? And a lot of what we've done is very long-lasting. This book got me realizing how long, right? It really made me think. Right now we know that climate change has enough momentum to raise the seas 1 meter. They're already rising about 9 inches. So we don't know when that's going to happen. Right now, everything's happening faster than the models. So 1 meter by likely the end of this century. And it doesn't happen a little bit at a time. It happens one storm at a time sometimes. But that's going to happen no matter what. We evaporate tomorrow, the seas will still rise 1 meter. But they'll stop. That's interesting, right? Impact. What is our impact on this planet? So it got me thinking, and it got me rethinking almost everything. How do I think about the past, the present, and the future? Do I make decisions differently now after reading that book? Yeah, definitely, right? So how do I think about the past? I said I started my career in historic preservation. I love historic buildings. I think they're just magical. They've got good energy. They've survived the test of time. Most of them were built very efficiently. They were built before air conditioning, before central heat. I can actually get a historic building to net zero energy easier than some of the newer ones because they were done right to begin with. They have good orientation, they have nice thermal energy. Yes, I can retrofit the windows. I don't have to replace them. That's a big thing for anybody in historic preservation. But these buildings are pretty timeless, most of them. I still can't warm up to brutalism, I'm sorry. But most historic buildings have a lot of character. They're timeless, right? There are a lot of historic buildings that aren't. I've worked with buildings that were built as temporary structures during World War II. They were never meant to last more than 3 years, and here they are, and now they're historic. So some of that's kind of tough. But for the most part, they were built resourcefully. And what does that mean? The materials came from local sources. We're doing that now in sustainable design. You get extra points for using materials within a 500-mile radius. Around here, we have a lot of choice on that. It's pretty great. Even though we're cut off. Other parts of the country have a full circle. We have a half circle, but we have a lot within that half circle. Ingenuity. I included a water wheel because these are some of the technologies we still use today. And we're using technology to innovate, to improve and build on what was done. So that legacy of technology, you look at a water wheel and you're like, oh, how quaint. That was incredibly innovative, right? That was running mills, that was feeding people. And eventually it was actually running energy, it was hydropower, right? And now we have hydropower, and it's very complex. Windmills, wind turbines. Windmills were actually invented. They appeared first in the Middle East. You don't expect that. You'd think they'd be full of sand, but they were originally invented, I think, in Samaria, and then brought into Europe. Northern Europe specifically was perfect for it. And now we're building off of that. That's super clean energy. It's really interesting to go back. We constantly return back to the legacy of the past to inform now, right? And I find that really inspirational. What can I learn from the past to teach me how to live better today? And I dare you, if you look at a really beautiful, fantastic example of sustainable design today, you're going to see a lot of features that have been done for 2,000 years or more. Everything old is new again, right? We might just be using slightly different technology to build it. Significance, what do you put your money and your materials into? If you had a really important building, you built it out of masonry. Homes were generally built out of wood, unless you lived in a city where things caught on fire a lot, like Savannah, right? All you needed was one big fire and everything went to brick. But that was pretty important, right? So the city center was often brick, and the farther you got from the city center, you'd find more wood. Scarcity, what was scarce? You can kind of look at the evolution of historic architecture and get a sense for what was scarce at the time. There are federal buildings built during World War II that have no steel in them because we needed it for everything we were doing for the war effort. And you have buildings that were built in 1944 that are built with big wood beams that look like modern buildings today, but they're actually wood. So it's interesting. They all tell a story. And then ultimately survival. That's why we have buildings. It's one of the essential needs of humans. But what do we actually need? These houses weren't generally ostentatious unless you were royalty. How much space do you really need? So what's today? Today is the Anthropocene era, right? It's very human-centric. What do we need? It's all about our needs right now. And that sounds very negative, but it's true. I mean, everything since, probably the Roman times just about has been very human-centric. Even before that, I don't know if it was so much human-centric as survival before that, but we tend to take what we need first. And more, I would say since the 70s, 60s, 70s, we have started saying, but let's not take too much. Gotten a little better about that. We still do this. We have this attitude of greed as a species that, sprawl. I can't tell you how often I talk to people about these wonderful little sustainable neighborhoods, and they're like, oh, I couldn't live on a lot that small. I need an acre. Why? You hire someone to mow the lawn. Why do you need an acre? Well, I don't want people looking at me. And I'm like, do you look at your neighbors? Your neighbors aren't looking at you. Talk about self-centric. Nobody's looking at you. But, what do we really need? What is our minimum? And there's this, I love that houses are getting smaller now. That makes me happy. How much do we really need? There are studies where people have done heat maps of their homes, just putting a red dot wherever they spend the most time. And you find that your house is this big and you spend all your time right here. The idea that we need more and more space is pretty anthropocentric. What do we really need? It's also really expensive, right? It's very expensive to own too much. Then also material integrity. I was at a conference once. I was in Las Vegas, and we were in one of the ostentatious hotels, and the developer and the builder of the hotel comes in, and she's like, look around. This place is amazing. It's the most incredible project I've ever done in my life. See all these materials? None of them are what they actually look like. And I just wanted to go, blah. That's awful. Luxury vinyl tile that looks like wood. Luxury vinyl is an oxymoron anyway, but stuff that looks like what it isn't is a total abdication of integrity, right? And then on top of that, vinyl's on the red list for materials because we know there's a whole red list of materials that we know cause usually cancer at some point in its life cycle, whether it's in extraction, manufacturing, use, or disposal, right? So vinyl's on that list. Vinyl emits dioxin during fabrication and then at the end of life. Depends on how it's disposed of. Dioxin is being found now in mother's milk and at the bottom of the ocean, and it's not good stuff, right? So think about what our materials are. I remember the days of Corian countertops. Everybody wanted Corian. Well, Corian's basically plastic. People used to joke that your house would burn down and then there'd be this piece of Corian in the middle of it, right? Well, the Corian would be a little melted, but it still wouldn't go anywhere. So in this book, Alan Weisman describes the Earth of the future. I think he says like 500 years from now, 200, 500, whatever it was. He says you're going to walk around. The houses will be laying down on the ground in pieces. You're going to see a lot of plastic. If you have EFIS, if you have like the synthetic stucco, that's plastic. It's still going to be sitting there. But then he's describing this wasteland of Little Tikes toys sticking out of the soil, like the end of Planet of the Apes, right? And you're like, God, how much plastic do I own? Do I need another plastic chair? This book got me I stopped buying plastic if I could possibly help it. I didn't need one more plastic toy. I didn't need one more piece of plastic furniture. It really bothered me. That image, I'm so visual, that image bothered me a lot. So I rethought it, and now I'm very tactile. How many of you shop with your hands and knock everything off the shelves like I do? I love how my belongings feel now. I have all natural materials, it's wood, it's real, wool and cotton rugs, it just feels better. It's different, but it took me a long time to get to that point where I was doing that. But this book got me rethinking how I treat that. We have conservation labels now. We have green rated buildings. Great, that's kind of like Green Building 101 if you need the label on it. Otherwise, we just need to make these buildings differently. all of them, every single one of them. It shouldn't have specific labels. We have labels on parts of land. This area of land we're conserving. It has a label. We're very proud of it. Here's a parking lot so you can go in and explore this very sacred piece of land that we're not developing. Over here, we're going to let this developer fill in a wetland and build ticky-tacky houses that all look together, all look alike, right? What is it? The little pink houses, ticky-tacky houses. What's the song, right? The fact that we still allow that hurts my heart. When I see a developer sign go up and the bulldozers go into the wetlands, and it's such an extraordinary ecosystem in there. And then I'm like, if you have to cross over a moat to get into your gated community, that's a pretty good sign that they've brought in a lot of soil to get your house to the level it needs to be. So it doesn't, so it's not wet. I keep thinking, if you thought poltergeist was scary, wait till you buy a house that's built on a swamp, right? Then you have the subject of risk and damage. Are we building now, are we building in places that won't be here in 100 years? Savannah, Eastern Riverfront. It's 4 feet above sea level. There's a ton of money being poured into that area. Who thought that was a good idea? But it's also interesting because when I talk to planners, and I've talked to quite a few planners about how they're dealing with climate change and looking four-dimensionally, we need four-dimensional planners these days. What are you doing differently now? And I talked to one, he says, well, I'll tell you, we have an operable bridge over the intercoastal. It was unique when it was built. It's still unique now. The parts are extraordinarily expensive. It needs complete renovation. But it's leading out to barrier islands that won't be here in 60 years. How much do we invest in that bridge? And then, how do you retreat? So I get involved in a lot of conversations about planning for climate change. A lot of my projects right now are climate action planning. So you can address climate change as sort of adaptation. Okay, it's coming. How can we change what we're doing to live better and adapt to what's happening? Probably means a lot of us are moving north. You can mitigate, which is attempt to protect yourself from the ravages of climate change. Sometimes if you're looking at sea level, they're building barriers. The ocean always wins. But up in the mountains, when you've got flooding and forest fires and things, you can definitely mitigate. The forest fires don't need to reach your city. There's a lot of mitigation we're doing right now. Or there's always denial. It's not going to happen. Or I won't be alive to see it. Yeah, you will. You probably will. It's going to happen next year. But it's interesting that as we look at risk and potential damage of how we're building now and how that's going to affect the future, that's huge. Can you imagine all the waste that came out of the LA fires? Where did that all go? There's a landfill out there full of building waste that's just enormous. And how much of that was plastic? How much of that was toxic? And I think about that. When I was watching those fires and they're showing the rubble afterwards, I'm like, oh my God, the landfill pile is going to be huge. It's interesting. And, obviously, we all need to plan for whatever comes in the future. If you want what you have to last, right? And then you've got consumption. We're in an age now of consumption. What is it they said? Oh, I just heard this the other day. Our consumption patterns quadrupled 10 years ago. What was that? 10 or 12 years ago. Amazon. That was just on the radio yesterday. And I'm like, oh, Amazon went from selling books. I miss that so much. They actually had little bookstores inside the bookstore. Remember that? They don't do that anymore. But we suddenly went to Amazon. 12 years ago, Amazon exploded. You could get anything on Amazon. And then it went to overnight delivery, and it's crazy, right? Our consumption quadrupled. What are we buying now that we weren't buying 12 years ago? How much of that is biodegradable? What is it they say the average lifespan of something we buy is about 2.5 hours? Think about it, right? And when you look at your kids want something or your grandkids want something as you're checking out, look at it and go, okay, how long are you going to own that? What's going to happen to that? It's a good question to ask your kids and grandkids. What happens to that when you're not interested anymore? What's it made of? Who are you going to give it to? Is somebody going to want it after you? It's really interesting. What happens afterwards? Four-dimensional thinking. We're used to seeing thinking in 3 dimensions, but 4 dimensions, we have to think about where things came from and where they're going. That's what I really got out of this. Actually, when I read this book, I started talking in my lectures about 4-dimensional planning, 4-dimensional design. That really, really changed how I think. And then the future, obviously, I've touched on a lot of this. The future is going to be responsive. We have a lot of stuff coming at us really fast. We have overpopulation, we have climate change, we have economic uncertainty and sometimes craziness. Who knows where we're going to be in 10 years? Responsive. Everything we do has to be able to pivot almost on a dime. Do you think that, I work right now with healthcare, hospitals, campuses, things like that. I decarbonize these large organizations. Do you think for a minute that the hospitals in Asheville planned for what happened back in September? Ironically, I had just given a lecture in Asheville 5 days before that rainstorm, where I opened the whole lecture by saying, no city in this world can handle 20 inches of rain in one event. And that weekend, I was getting emails from people going, oh my God, I was at your lecture. I can't believe you said that. I said, yeah, neither can I, and it happened. But that's how fast it happens, right? So everything we do has to be responsive. We're going to be resilient. I can tell you from the design industry, we are designing for resilience. That means that I'm looking toward more renewable energy on site and in the grid. I'm looking for flexibility. I'm looking for a building that can withstand winds, rain. We're beefing up structure to take more rain if we need it. Our water system in Beaufort County is in trouble. Just how many people even know that? Yeah, we have saltwater inundation because a lot of the water being pulled out of the aquifer is being used for landscape and agriculture. In a place where we get 55 inches of rain a year, you're still irrigating your lawn. What plants do you have in your yard that need more water than naturally falls here? You probably have magnolias, you have myrtles, you have oaks. All this stuff has been here for a long, long, long time without an irrigation system. So really thinking to undo some of the stuff we've done is how we're going to be resilient and responsive, right? And then integrative. Everything's going to fit together, right? Everything fits together constantly. If you haven't figured out, what is it, the butterfly wing flapping here can cause a storm in China. Everything's connected. And we're learning now how everything is connected. So you're going to start to see cities that are connected, and we're trying to get better at connecting people. So any natural system can also be applied to social systems. My next favorite book, when they were asking me what book I wanted to present, is Thinking in Systems, and I'm such a dork because that is an amazing book. Written by an engineer about pipes and pumps, and then she relates it all to human beings and to culture. So any system, an economic system, a cultural system, an organizational system, And she breaks it down. But thinking in systems as resilience going forward is amazing, right? Regenerative, back to integrity, to permanence, impermanence. Building with integrity, understanding the repercussions of choosing the materials we choose. Vinyl siding, I think you're going to start to see vinyl siding fade out, I hope. Because, well, things like hardy siding is better, right? We all kind of like that anyway. But hardy is eventually biodegradable, and it's certainly not toxic. It's a mix of concrete and wood fiber and stuff. It's not bad. So again, thinking about what you're willing to pay for, right? Yeah, vinyl siding is cheaper, but what kind of physical legacy am I leaving with that? And then a circular economy. You're starting to see things used and reused and reused. Poshmark, awesome. Get rid of sell your clothes to somebody who wants them, right? It's pretty great. Antiques are starting to make a comeback, but they're getting renovated before you buy it. It's really kind of interesting to see what people are doing with old stuff right now. The circular economy is exciting. I'm seeing different versions of it, and it's interesting. There's an opportunity in our own neighborhoods. It's a sharing economy sometimes. If it's not circular, it's sharing. I keep saying, you want to attract me to an HOA? Give me a pickup truck I can use on the weekends that's owned by the HOA. How cool is that? But the circular sharing economy means that I'm not buying my own stuff. I don't need to buy that tree trimmer on the stick if I use it once every 3 years. What is it? Can we create a tool library or something where we share more stuff? We don't have to each own one. There's a lot of things in your life you should be able to share in a group. So it's really interesting to me, and it's exciting to see what we're doing, and we're doing better. For starters, even residential developments are going in a place that we're not used to here in the United States. In Europe, they're going to net zero neighborhoods, which is very cool. Net zero plus food production. So the average family of 4 can eat on 1/10 of an acre of land for garden space. That's interesting, isn't it? I got that right from Michael Pollan, who, by the way, answers his own phone. So it's really kind of thought-provoking. A lot of this made me rethink my decisions going forward. So as I conclude here, I'm thinking about all kinds of things. So during the Great Recession, I remember a whole bunch of car dealers went out of business. Remember that? And they were like parking lots, empty parking lots all over the place. How fast did Mother Nature take over those parking lots? Really fast. So sometimes we don't want permanence in our choices. I want Mother Nature to take over that asphalt parking lot if nobody's there. That's going to be really important. Solar power, that actually lasts a long time. The National Renewable Energy Lab out in Golden, Colorado, still has solar panels functioning that were installed in about 1972. They're still generating energy, maybe about 60% of what they had, or 50%, but they're still generating. Right now, if you put solar panels on your house and they're facing south, you've got about a 6 to 7 year payback, and then you own your energy. I built a net zero energy house in Bluffton. You can find my TED Talk on that. I won't go into that. But when I sold it, the couple was so excited that they weren't going to have the uncertainty of utility costs. And again, I was looking to the future because energy will never be as cheap as it is right now. And during the pandemic, it jumped 18% in 1 year. And I don't know who was ready for that. Can you imagine running a school and suddenly having to pay 18% higher utility rates and having to make a decision on which teacher to get rid of because you have to pay the utility, right? I keep hoping Beaufort County schools will move towards more renewable energy because it just makes that much difference. Then we've got like Daytona Beach, that you have these huge homes that were washed away during one of the hurricanes, and they're building them back right where they were. And you're just knocking your head on the wall going, why? Why? And then they complain that, oh, the insurance companies won't cover you in Florida anymore. Duh. So I think about stuff like that all the time. At some point, we have to retreat. And going back to those approaches to climate change, there is a time to retreat. The problem is who's going to pay for it? Somebody's going to eat it, and that's tough. It's a really hard decision to make. But again, the world without us, they're gone anyway. So let's design a world with us that looks a little bit like the world without us so that we don't have such a heavy footprint. Let's move towards better living. I love Beaufort and our beautiful bike trail. I want to see more development along there so that I want to go there. I want to live there. I'm still amazed that those are some of the cheapest houses in the area right next to the bike trail. They should be 3 times the cost of anything else because it's so cool. I can ride my bike to Publix. How great would it be to live where you don't even have to get in your car? People do that in Hilton Head all the time. I didn't realize that. That's a lifestyle in Hilton Head. Oh yeah, I don't have a car. You don't need one in Hilton Head because the trails go everywhere. There's a lot of, if you look at the most rideable, bikeable places in the country, it's pretty high real estate costs because people want to live there. But it's also low impact. There's no pollution. The e-bikes, it depends on how you're charging it. But, low impact. What's your impact? That's what this book got me thinking about, is what's my impact? What is my legacy? I've been thinking about writing a book on regenerative planning called Mulligan. Let's do it over. Let's do it better this time. Somebody I really respect said, if you were in a bus full of people heading for a cliff, would it help to slow down? Or does it help to turn around and go a completely different direction? That's valid. So this book was the beginning of really the complete redesigning of my thought process in planning. Hopefully you read it or you have read it and it got you thinking too. It's a great book. Thank you. So I've been told we have a little bit, sorry, I talked over. We have a little bit of time for questions. Anybody have questions? Conversation. Refute me. Yes?
No, I'm not going to refute you. My wife is a biochemist who risk management and medical staff quality assessment. And were she here, she would ask, is there a set of metrics that are internationally utilized in terms of what is and qualifies for total zero emissions, so that you can go to France, you can go to Germany, you can go to Mexico, everybody's using the same set of numbers?
They actually are. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol is setting that standard for corporations and businesses globally. If you are doing business in Europe, you have to report to that. That includes most American companies, so thank God for Europe, they're requiring this. At a residential level, my favorite yardstick is the Living Building Challenge. They have a net zero yardstick that you can look at. It's out there, definitely out there. Those are the 2 best ones, the 2 biggest, bestest. They're great. Living Building Challenge, if anybody is interested in really beautiful, sustainable architecture, it's my favorite rating system of all of them.
And if you go to Mesa Verde and listen really, really carefully, you can still hear the people who used to live there.
I love that. That's what I love about historic sites, because there is an energy there that never goes away. Anybody else? Red.
Do you have any thoughts about the housing development that will be going in on the waterfront in Port Royal?
I have only seen renderings of it, and I think not even that. I think I just saw the plans for it. I think it's awfully close to sea level. And you can raise a building 12 feet, but how are you going to get there? You're going to have dock. Yeah, I'm very suspicious of anything right now that's being built within 10 feet of sea level. I think that's a huge risk, unless it floats. And there's a lot of people out there looking at Waterworld and thinking, how can we get these things to float? It's interesting. They make big old docks. They should make it float. Mm-hmm.
Is there anything going on now with government agencies that are being reduced or shut down that worries you and environmentalists?
I'll give you one example, and it's probably indicative of the whole problem right now. I am friends with the last two Secretary of Energy at the Pentagon, and they were let go 2 weeks ago. So the office of the Undersecretary of Energy is closed for the Pentagon. So when Texas went dark 3 years ago, they lost their grid. 2 major military bases went offline, freaked out the Pentagon. Nobody talked about it until the power came back on because they didn't want anybody to know that we were that vulnerable in such a huge area. The Pentagon started a program a while back called Net Zero Bases. They brought it back to life last year as a result of that. The U.S. grid has been deemed not stable enough for our military and for national security, but the Pentagon Energy Office is closed. That's just one. I got a lot of friends at the Department of Energy who are sitting around in sweatpants and fleece this week that were doing amazing work, really, really important work. But it'll come back. Resilience, people. Resilience.
I was hearing something on probably NPR about turning fog into water.
Fog is water, so it makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, all you have to do is put something cold up there, and it's like a big milk carton. It'll draw it. So they're doing that in the Middle East. They're actually using biomimicry. So biomimicry is learning from nature. There's a lot of plants in the desert that catch water at night. So they're learning from those plants how to create structures that catch water at night in the desert. It's fascinating. Yes, they're absolutely doing that. They're using it in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and they're using it in the Middle East. And in fact, for a long time, Bedouin tribes used very crude versions of that. That's how the Bedouins have always gotten water. Anybody else? Is that a hand up right there? Oh, were you scratching your face? Okay. Yeah.
I'm with you, but I am very pessimistic about being able to win the economic race to the bottom. As long as styrofoam bags or containers are cheaper than plastic, and as long as people say, I want to save money, you're going to go to styrofoam. So absent regulation, or government, if you will, we're going to lose the race to the bottom. And right now, at least, we are in a heavily anti-regulation, anti-government mode. So, as I say, I'm with you, but I'm very dubious about winning that race to the bottom. Many people in this room were of an age, can recall when you speak about Amazon, perhaps before you will recall in, say, the 50s. The spring and summer, Montgomery Ward, Sears Roebuck, and Penny's catalogs, each of which were maybe 1,000, 1,500 pages.
I remember the big Sears one, yeah.
That's right, and there were 3 or 4 of them every spring, every summer, leaving aside the smaller ones. And that's no different than Amazon. And when you look back to, say, about 1905, when Sears Roebuck started the same catalog movement, the same race to the bottom began maybe 100, 125 years ago, and we're losing it.
Yeah, cheapest.
So I'm not sure, as good as it should be, what you can do to beat that race as long as when we
styrofoam bags, styrofoam, plastic, whatever. It's going to be there.
Yeah, I go back and forth between optimistic and pessimistic.
I'm sorry. The advantage of much of the European model is the high regulation against doing things that are stupid. And that's not the American way.
So there's, you know what the American way is? Cost. We do everything. I worked for a multinational company for a while. It was so easy. My European colleagues were like, oh, we just do it. I'm like, well, I have to make a compelling business case to do anything in the US. So until it's part of the business case, until we're actually charging the fully burdened cost of that object, which we don't. We subsidize a lot of industries, including oil and gas, which goes into styrofoam. Until we do that, anything we subsidize is gonna be cheaper. We have to rethink what we're subsidizing, right? So the oil and gas industry is getting heavily subsidized. The energy industry gets heavily subsidized. I was talking to somebody the other day that really about 60 to 80% of the energy that is generated for us is lost between the plant and our homes. If you sold 100 widgets and 60 of them got lost in the mail on the way, would you be in business? No. So until there is financial pain involved, they don't have a lot of motivation to change or to improve a process. That's tough. I mean, that's just the reality of being in a pretty money-centric society that we have in the United States. I think the answer is half and half, right?
Not so much a question, but something you said about Amazon. There is on Netflix a show called The Shopping Conspiracy. It was a documentary.
Cool.
And it talked about Amazon and some of the bigger companies and their impact on the environment and waste. It was
Oh, but they're green. They're, yeah. My disgust is when they tout all their greenness and they still are having an enormous physical impact on the planet.
That was a big topic of conversation in the series. It was very interesting.
Yeah. It sounds so depressing. Someone give me a good one. A happy one.
It's not a question.
Sure.
It's a suggestion. You know, we were talking about styrofoams and
I've heard you talk loud. You can talk real loud.
and to have, the 500,000 your life has in a landfill. And something I've taken from Elaine that's talking about, we all make a little bit of effort. It turns into a huge movement for good. But now at a restaurant, because I love leftovers, I'll say what she says. Do you pack your leftovers? They'll say, oh, you want to take that home in a doggy bag? And I'll say, do you have styrofoam containers? And if they say yes, ask for a template. What?
Aluminum foil. You can rinse it off, make a ball of it. You can't put it in flat, make a ball of it, and throw it in with your aluminum.
I take my own metal coffee cup to Urban Brew's local coffee shop. I don't go to Starbucks because it's a chain, but if I did, I think they would do that as well. They will fill up your cup. So,
Yeah, think
it's
about,
not all over COVID, but they're back to
I'm really obnoxious. I take my girls out, my daughters are like, why can't you be normal? I'm like, I am normal. Yes.
I think you want a happy one. It looks like for those of us of a certain age, I said a little while ago, tell your grandchildren about. A lot of us are hearing about this from our grandchildren.
I love that. Yay. I want to see that in education. My daughter has just got a master's degree in education science, and we were just talking about how nature-based education is so important. There's been a huge movement towards it in the last 20 years. It needs to be even more. It's still very regional. An outdoor classroom experience looks very different here than in the Pacific Northwest, because as soon as we teach our children to love nature, they will care about nature. They'll make the right decision. They'll decide not to use styrofoam at their deli that they own. They'll make the right decisions. But the problem is we've been so separate from nature for a few generations It's really interesting. My mom, she was born in 1941, and I got really into canning and growing my own food and making my own bread way before the pandemic. I was doing that. I had chickens in Denver. We were like celebrities on the block. Everybody come to look at our chickens, and my daughters got used to giving biology lessons to men who would say, "How do you get eggs with no rooster?" But I love living like that. I love, love, love it. And I called my mom at the beginning of this. I said, "I'm learning how to pressure can. Have you ever done that?" She's like, "Why would I do that? Why would you do that?" And then I remembered, most of my childhood was frozen dinners. The frozen Tyson chicken or whatever that was, the banquet chicken, frozen or refrigerated rolls. I mean, if it was fast and easy, my mother was such a space-age girl. She loved the quick and easy meals. And she still looks at me and goes, "You're amazing. You're just like your grandmother." I said, "That's the idea." I like that. I think that's our limit.